She didn't know that signing the lease on her coffee shop would be the last uncomplicated thing she'd ever do. At 31, Tara Voss had exactly 3 things she was proud of: her daughter Penny, her espresso pulls, and the fact that she'd rebuilt her life from nothing without asking anyone for help. The coffee shop was supposed to be the 4th. Grounds and Grace, tucked on the corner of a quiet street in Savannah, Georgia. Warm lighting, secondhand chairs, the smell of cardamom, and dark roast soaked into the walls. It had taken her 4 years of saving, 2 years of planning, and one very stupid Tuesday afternoon to lose it all. She hadn't known the investor who backed her build-out was a front, hadn't known the money was dirty, the permits were fraudulent, or that the man who'd smiled across the conference table and called her a smart woman with a real future had been laundering cash through a dozen small businesses across the Southeast. She'd just been a single mom who made good coffee and wanted something of her own. The morning federal agents walked through her front door. Penny was at school. That was the only thing Tara could feel grateful for in the weeks that followed, that her daughter hadn't been there to watch her mother sit at a stainless steel table while 2 men in identical blazers explained exactly how deep a hole she was standing in. She wasn't charged. The agents made that clear, eventually. But the business was frozen, the accounts were seized, the building was flagged, and in the middle of all of it, the man who'd been quietly watching the investigation from 3 degrees of separation sent a car to her apartment. His name was Ronan Hale. Tara had heard the name before. You didn't live in this city without hearing it, but she'd never had reason to attach a face to it. He was 43, she would learn later, former military, current something, that had no clean title. He controlled more of the city's infrastructure than the mayor did, and he did it without appearing in photographs. The car arrived on a Wednesday evening while Penny was at her grandmother's. The driver didn't explain, just handed her a card with an address printed in plain type and said, "He'd like to speak with you, Ms. Voss. He'll only ask once." She almost didn't go. She stood in her kitchen for 20 minutes, staring at the card, thinking about everything her mother had ever said about women who got into cars with men they didn't know. Then she thought about the eviction notice that had come that morning, and Penny's tuition payment due in 2 weeks, and the fact that every door she'd knocked on in the last month had stayed firmly shut. She got in the car. The building he worked from looked like a private law firm from the outside, marble lobby, security desk, no sign. She was taken to the 14th floor, to an office that faced the river. Ronan Hale was standing at the window when she entered, his back to her, watching the water catch the last of the evening light. He turned when she sat down. She'd prepared herself for something theatrical. What she got instead was a man who looked tired in a very specific way, like someone who'd made too many decisions in too many rooms like this one and had long since stopped finding it interesting. "Mrs. Voss." His voice was flat, not unkind. "You built something good. It wasn't your fault it was used against you. Then I'd like it back," she said. Something in his expression shifted, just slightly, like she'd answered a question he hadn't asked yet. "I can make that happen. What does that cost?" He sat down across from her then, set his hands flat on the desk. 6 months. You run the shop, legitimately, properly, no involvement in anything I do but under my protection. My name on the secondary LLC. If anyone comes looking for leverage against you, they find me instead." Tara stared at him. "And what do you get?" "Cover," he said simply. "A business with clean books and no connection to my other operations. I have reasons to want something ordinary looking on my portfolio right now, so I'm a prop. You're a solution. There's a difference." She almost laughed. He reminded her of someone she'd once dated in her 20s. A man who'd framed every transaction as mutual and then been baffled when she called it what it was. "And if I say no, then you leave, and I don't follow up, and you figure out the next step on your own." He picked up his pen, turned it once in his fingers. "But the federal flag on your building won't lift without someone interceding. I'm the only person in this city with enough standing to do that cleanly. That sounds like a threat." "It's a fact." He met her eyes. "I'm not going to pretend it isn't one." At least he was honest about that much. She looked at him for a long time. At the tired eyes, the careful stillness, The way he held himself like a man who'd trained himself out of nervous habits so completely that he'd forgotten what ease looked like. 6 months, she said. My shop, my decisions. You don't touch anything I bake or brew or hire. Agreed. And Penny doesn't know your name. A pause. Barely half a second. Agreed. She stood up. Then I'll need my keys back by Friday. She walked out of that office telling herself she had no illusions. This was a transaction. She would use him the same way he was using her, and when 6 months were up, she would take her shop and her daughter and put as much distance between herself and Ronan Hale as the state of Georgia allowed. That was the plan. The keys were on her kitchen counter by Thursday morning. The first month was purely logistical. A new LLC filed, a lawyer she'd never met handled the paperwork, the federal flag on the building lifted within 10 days in a way that her own attorney had told her would take minimum 8 months. She didn't ask how. She reopened Grounds and Grace on a Tuesday, and by Friday the regulars were back, and Penny came in after school and sat at the corner table doing homework, while the smell of cinnamon and steamed milk filled the room, and Tara almost forgot that any of it was complicated. She saw Ronan twice that month. Once when a man she didn't recognize came in, ordered a black coffee, and sat for 40 minutes reading a newspaper before leaving without a word. She found out later he was a city inspector who'd been planning to fail her ventilation certification. He didn't. The second time, Ronan himself came in on a quiet Thursday morning. No driver, no security she could see. He wore a gray jacket and ordered a pour-over and sat by the window with a folder open in front of him, and she did not go over and he did not wave her down. And when he left, he put a 50 on the counter that was twice the price of what he'd ordered. She told herself it wasn't a pattern. People sat in coffee shops. Men in gray jackets read documents. This was nothing. Then his daughter walked in. She was 9 years old, with her father's dark eyes and a backpack covered in enamel pins, and she climbed up onto a stool at the counter and announced, very seriously, that she'd heard this place had the best hot chocolate in Savannah, and she'd come to verify that personally. Her name was June, and then Tara remembered her rules and caught herself, because the child had introduced herself, and that was that. That was just a name that existed in the world. Who told you about the hot chocolate? Tara asked, pulling out the good cocoa. My dad. She kept her expression neutral. Does your dad know you're here? The girl, she had to be 9, maybe 10, tilted her head like the question was mildly insulting. He's right outside. He just doesn't do well in small spaces. Tara looked toward the window. Ronan was standing on the sidewalk, hands in his jacket pockets, watching the street. He glanced in once, briefly, and she held his gaze for a moment before turning back to the counter. She made the hot chocolate with whole milk and a pinch of cayenne, the way she made it for Penny on cold mornings. The girl tried it and went quiet in the particular way children go quiet when something is exactly right. Yeah, she said finally. That's the one. She came back the next Saturday, and the one after that. Always with Ronan nearby, never inside, like he'd decided the coffee shop was safe enough to let her cross into, but not somewhere he could let himself be ordinary. Tara didn't ask about it. She had her own rules about not getting attached to things that belonged to complicated men. But she started keeping the good cocoa stocked, and she learned that the girl liked her hot chocolate with exactly 1 marshmallow, never 2. And she was working on a science fair project about bioluminescent organisms, and she thought her dad worked too much, but she also thought he was the best person she knew. And she said both of those things in the same sentence, without any apparent awareness of the contradiction. Kids were like that. Penny was like that. Tara understood it completely. The second month was when things stopped being simple. A man came in late on a Friday, 20 minutes before close, and sat at the back table. He ordered nothing. When Tara's last employee left, he stood up and walked to the counter and told her, very quietly, that her new business partner had enemies, and that she should think carefully about whose name was on her building. She didn't let her hands shake until he was out the door. She called the number on the card Ronan's driver had given her. She expected voicemail. He picked up on the second ring. There was a man in my shop, she said. He didn't leave a name. A pause, tall, scar on the left side of his jaw. Yes, he's been dealt with. He won't come back, What does dealt with mean? It means he won't come back. His voice was even not defensive. Are you all right? The question caught her off guard. People in Ronan Hale's position in her experience did not ask if you were all right. They managed outcomes. They issued assurances. They did not ask. I'm fine, she said, but I need to understand what I'm in the middle of. If Penny is going to be in that shop, she won't be touched. The flatness in his voice had shifted into something harder. I would burn down everything I've built before I let anything happen to a child. Yours or mine. She believed him. That was the part she hadn't expected. Okay, she said. Lock up and go home. I'll have someone on the block tonight. She locked up. She drove to her mother's and picked up Penny, who was full of opinions about a movie she'd watched and fell asleep in the back seat before they got home. Tara carried her inside and stood in the doorway of her daughter's room for a long time, watching her breathe. She'd made a choice that had put them in this. She needed to remember that. But she'd also made a choice that had kept them fed and housed and had given her daughter a mother who wasn't drowning. She needed to remember that too. She started to see the shape of him in the 3rd month. Not the version that appeared in carefully absent public records, not the city's quiet speculation, but the actual shape, the specific human contours of who Ronan Hale was when he wasn't managing something. He came in alone on a Sunday morning when she was doing inventory. The shop was closed, but she'd left the side door unlocked for a delivery, and he knocked on it instead of the front. Delivery was rerouted, he said when she opened it. He held up a paper bag. Bagels from Clary's. I was already in the area. She stared at him. You were in the area at 7 in the morning bringing me bagels. There's also cream cheese. She let him in. They sat at the counter and ate bagels in silence, and it was the most ordinary thing that had happened to her in 3 months, and she didn't know what to do with that except eat the bagel. Your daughter made it to the semi-finalists in the science fair, he said, not looking up from his coffee. Tara set down her cup. How do you know that? She told me. He glanced up. She comes in on Saturdays. So do I sometimes. We've spoken. Tara thought about her rules. About not getting attached to things that belong to complicated men. About the fact that she had been very careful, in a city that had already knocked her down once, not to let anything get past her defenses. What do you talk about? She asked. Bioluminescent organisms. A beat. And whether or not one marshmallow is definitively better than 2. She almost smiled, caught herself. Ronan, Tara. It was the first time either of them had used the other's first name. They both noticed it. I don't know what this is, she said. Honest because she was tired of not being. What you're doing. I have a daughter. I have one job right now and it's her. And this arrangement was supposed to be clean and simple, and it is not feeling clean and simple. He looked at her for a long moment. No, he said. It's not. So what do we do about that? He turned his coffee cup in his hands. She'd learned that was his nervous habit, the one he'd trained out almost completely, but not quite. I don't know, he said. I haven't known what to do about it for about 6 weeks. 6 weeks. She counted back. That would have been around the time his daughter first sat down at her counter and said, "That's the one." She picked up her bagel. We finished the arrangement, she said. 4 more months, and then we figure out what's left. He nodded once. They finished breakfast in silence. It was the most comfortable silence she'd sat in since before everything fell apart. The 4th month was the month she found out why he was tired. His daughter's mother had died 3 years ago. Not something dramatic or violent. A car accident on a Tuesday morning, ordinary and terrible and complete. He'd been away when it happened. That was the part he carried with him. Tara would learn later. Not the grief, which was immense, but the Tuesday morning, the being away, the 2 hours of not knowing. She found out because his daughter told her, matter-of-factly, the way 9-year-olds tell you things they've processed into simple fact. My mom died when I was 6. Dad doesn't talk about it, but I do because my therapist says it's healthier. Tara had looked at this child and thought, she is going to be extraordinary. Your therapist is right, she said. Dad cried once. I saw him through the door. He didn't know. The girl looked up from her hot chocolate. I think he's less sad now than he used to be. He smiles more. A pause. He smiles most on Sundays. Tara filed that away and said nothing. She brought it up to Ronan once, obliquely, when he came to handle a problem with a vendor who'd been pressuring her for information about him. After the vendor issue was resolved, quietly, without incident, in the way Ronan resolved things, she poured 2 cups of coffee and set one in front of him. She told me about her mom, Tara said. He went still in the way he went still when something mattered. I know. She told me, she told you. She's okay. She's better than I've been, he said, and it came out simpler than he probably meant it to. The kind of honest thing that slips out before the careful part of your brain can stop it. He looked at his coffee. She's the only thing I've done right in the last 3 years. Tara thought about Penny, about the years after Penny's father left, when she'd been so consumed by surviving that she'd forgotten there was supposed to be something worth surviving for. About the first time Penny had climbed into her lap and fallen asleep, and she'd understood, cellular and total, that she would burn down the world for this person. I know that feeling, she said. They sat with that for a while. The 5th month was when the thing she'd been refusing to name broke through the surface. One of Ronan's rivals sent 2 men to the shop on a night Penny was there doing homework. They didn't come inside. They stood across the street, visible enough to be a message, and Tara had gotten Penny into the back room under the pretense of checking a delivery before she'd sent the text. Ronan was there in 8 minutes. She didn't know what he said to the 2 men. She didn't go outside. She stayed in the back with her daughter, who was 9 and adaptable, and had accepted the explanation of business stuff with the trust of a child who doesn't know yet to be afraid. When it was clear, Ronan came to the back door. He looked at Penny first, just to confirm she was okay, and then at Tara, and in his face was something that had not been there in the first month, something that couldn't be categorized as a business arrangement or mutual utility. "You should go home," he said. "You should explain to me why your problems keep becoming mine." Penny looked up from her homework, having apparently filed the situation into a folder she would process later. "Hi," she said to Ronan. "Are you the person who brings my mom bagels?" A beat. "Occasionally. She says you're a business associate. That's accurate. That's accurate. She makes the same face about you that she made about Mr. Carver, who used to come into our old apartment building. He brought her tomatoes from his garden." Penny returned to her worksheet with the satisfaction of someone who has made a devastating observation and chosen not to follow it up. Tara stared at the wall. Ronan, to his credit, was very carefully not smiling. "I'll wait outside." She got Penny's things together and drove her home and settled her in for the night. And then she sat at her kitchen table and thought for a long time about tomatoes and what Mr. Carver had eventually become, which was a very good friend who had been at her side during 3 of the hardest years of her life. She thought about what she was not willing to lose again. She drove back to the shop. He was still there, on the sidewalk, which she hadn't expected. She'd expected him to have managed things and left. "You stayed," she said. "I wanted to make sure the building was secure. The building is fine. I know." She looked at him, really looked, the way she'd been carefully not doing for 5 months. "Ronan." "I know," he said again, different this time. "I need you to say it first," she said. "I need the person with more power in this arrangement to go first, because I have a daughter, and I have spent the last 4 years being the person who goes first and doesn't get it returned, and I can't do that again." He was quiet for a moment. She watched him work through it, the careful man, the controlled man, the one who'd trained himself out of every visible habit. "I don't know how to be ordinary," he said finally. "I've forgotten, or I never learned, and what I'm offering you isn't ordinary. It's complicated, and it has a history, and there are people in this city who will always be a factor. I know that, and I'm telling you that because I want you to actually choose it, not because you've run out of other options, not because it's pragmatic." He looked at her. "Because you want to." Tara thought about the girl who'd needed a business deal to save her daughter's home, and about the woman she'd been building herself back into, quietly, in the margins of that same deal. Competent and observant, and no longer willing to fold herself into shapes that didn't fit. "I want to," she said. "That's the terrifying part." He exhaled, just slightly, like something had been held tight for a long time and was finally being set down. "Okay," he said. "Okay," she agreed. They stood on the sidewalk outside her coffee shop, and it was not the beginning she would have written for herself, but it was real and it was hers, and that made it worth more than anything she'd ever been handed. The arrangement ended at 6 months, as agreed. The LLC restructured. The building went back into her name, clean and clear, no flags, no entanglements. What didn't end was harder to define and easier to keep. Ronan stepped back from the parts of his work that had shadowed her doorway. Not all of it. He was honest about that, and she didn't ask him to be someone he couldn't sustain. But enough. A narrowing. A redirection. He was still a man with edges, and she was still a woman who needed to be able to trust her own judgment. And they were still working out the distance between those two facts on a Tuesday-by-Tuesday basis. His daughter came in on Saturdays and sat with Penny and argued about which enamel pins were the best ones to add to a backpack. A debate that was ongoing and heated and somehow also the most peaceful thing in Tara's week. On a Sunday in early spring, a year after the day the federal agents had walked through her door, Tara was doing the early open when Ronan came in through the side entrance with 2 coffees he'd picked up from somewhere across town. Because he always picked up coffees from the place across town when he came on Sundays, which had become a fact of her life, the same way Penny's loud opinions, and the particular way the light came through the east window became facts of her life. "You're going to ruin my pour-over business," she said. "Your pour-over business is bulletproof." She took the cup. They stood at the counter together, not talking, watching the street wake up outside the windows. "I've been thinking," he said after a while, "that's usually how problems start. I want to introduce you properly to the people who matter, not as a business arrangement." He looked at her, "as what you actually are." Tara thought about the girl who'd gotten into the car, about every careful choice and every uncalculated one, about the fact that she had rebuilt herself twice now, and the second time had looked nothing like the first, and maybe that was the point. That the you who survives isn't the you who started, but if you're lucky, she's better. "Okay," she said, "but I have conditions. You always have conditions. Penny meets people on her own timeline, not yours, not mine, understood, and I want her to keep coming in on Saturdays regardless of what happens with us. I'm not losing that kid because of grown-up complications." Something shifted in his face. The tired quality she'd first seen in that office a year ago was still there, but quieter now, like a frequency that had been dialed down to a manageable register. "She wouldn't let you lose her," he said. "She's stubborn. Wonder where she gets that." He almost smiled. Not quite, but almost, and she'd learned to read the almost as clearly as the real thing. She refilled her cup and opened the register and let the morning come in, and it was ordinary, genuinely, properly ordinary in the way she'd spent 4 years rebuilding toward, and it was also everything. The light on the counter, the smell of cardamom, her daughter upstairs asleep in the apartment above the shop they'd nearly lost and hadn't. The man who'd handed her back her life and hadn't quite managed to leave after. Not a clean beginning, not a simple story, but the kind that's true because it costs something to get there, and you carry the cost, and it becomes part of you, and eventually you stop calling it a scar and start calling it a shape. That was enough. That was everything.